Hello everyone, Vicentio from HDTV Test here. Recently, I did a couple of YouTube videos exposing a very conservative or even non-existent HDR presentation on several 4K Blu-ray titles. And some of you asked me in the YouTube comment section whether I can give some examples of well-mastered HDR or good HDR, true HDR. So today I have one, which is The Greatest Showman, as you can see from the monitor and also the TV behind me. But before I get into that, some of you may have noticed that I have some marks on my face and you may be wondering why. No, I didn't get into a fight, but I did wear a very tight face mask, FFP3, to nip to the shops and get some tidbits. I am that sort of person who subscribes to the theory that if something that sits on your face is not tight enough, then it's not worth doing it. The Greatest Showman then. This is the 4K Blu-ray version, and the thing with most titles that are produced by 20th Century Fox is that when you look at the metadata, for example, I'm using a Panasonic UB9000 4K Blu-ray player to recall and show these metadata. You can see that even though there is the maximum mastering display luminance of 1000 nits, which means that this movie was probably graded on a Sony BVM X300 RGB OLED reference monitor, there's no max CLL or max FALL metadata. They are both zeroed out. And this is quite common on discs that are issued by 20th Century Fox. So just like what we did with our analysis of Blade Runner 2049 and also The Last Jedi, what I'm going to do is to put the disc through an Oppo 203 player, feed the signal to a Canon DP-V3120 reference broadcast monitor. This monitor has an HDR analysis toolkit which will allow us to check the frame luminance and also check the pixel value and also the waveform, and we can see what sort of dynamic range, what sort of max CLL and max FALL we get from this movie. So the most famous scene in this movie is probably the opera singing scene by Jenny Lin. So let's start there. When the curtains are raised up, you can see that the lights here reached almost 1000 nits already, which is, as expected for a movie that's supposed to be graded to 1000 nits. And then when she started singing, you can see that the glittering crystal embroidery on her gown reached even beyond 1000 nits, giving you that sort of sparkle, that sort of realism that only HDR can give. If you watch this in SDR, it can never give that sort of sparkle, that sort of glittering effect that catches your attention. And let's move on to the next scene then, which is this sequence where Zac Efron is drinking with Hugh Jackman in a bar, and you can see that the overhead pendants, in terms of the light that is emitted by the lamps, they exceeded 1000 nits, which gives that sort of dynamic range, yet all the shadow detail are still intact with inky blacks, giving us that sort of three-dimensional pop that SDR cannot give, and also very conservatively graded HDR movies, cannot deliver. And we go next to the opening sequence where Hugh Jackman is being silhouetted against some light, and these lights here again, they exceeded 1000 nits quite easily, giving that sort of contrast, that sort of dynamic range that again, it's what HDR is all about. And that's from the dynamic range and the HDR side of things. I need to mention that even though some other titles may have very bright max CLL, but they are basically just pushing the SDR, scaling it to the maximum value, which means that there's actually not much depth in between, and that is not the case with The Greatest Showman. With The Greatest Showman, you can see the shadow detail, the highlight detail, especially in terms of the highlight roll-off, is really, really quite pristine. It's top-notch. It's really top-notch. And the dynamic range, it's really utilizing the full capabilities, the full potential of HDR, unlike some other titles I've mentioned before. And it gives that sort of impact, that sort of wow, that sort of pop that SDR and less well-mastered HDR just cannot deliver. Next, what we are going to check is the white color gamut use. So from the beginning, you can see Hugh Jackman's red coat here, it exceeded Rec. 709, so there is certainly some white color gamut use here if you look at the chromaticity diagram. And then again, if we look at this frame where the queen is sitting on a red throne chair, the red on the throne chair again exceeded Rec. 709. And then last but not least, let's check the scene. Fairly bright, but the purple flowers, again, if you place the cursor of the pixel value checker on the Canon DP-V3120 there, you can see that it exceeded Rec. 709. So this disc is certainly making good use of WCG or white color gamut. So all in all, I think this is one of the best HDR showcase around in the consumer realm. And it helps as well that the Dolby Atmos soundtrack is extremely good, probably near reference level as well. So, the bass at the beginning, you can just hear how tight they are, test out your system, and then the singing of Genuine just to test your mid-range and highs. I think, it is a good disc to own, just to show off what HDR is all about. So if you want to see some other examples of well-mastered HDR, I have compiled a playlist here, so you can just click there. Or if you want to find out which are the titles that are not as well-mastered, they are fairly conservative, or they are even just SDR in an HDR container and you want to avoid them, I have compiled a playlist here if you want to click there and watch them. I'll see you in the next video.